Welcome back to another episode of Re-Correlated Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Natalie Baker. We have Mac back with us again, and Hollis is finally back this episode. So yay! We're so excited to have you back, Hollis. Welcome back. We have two special guests this time, so we're changing things up all over the place today. We have Jules DiPrima and DiPietro here to join us for our conversation on the $1 million MSSP lawsuit. Now, before we get into this, I feel like there's a disclaimer that needs to be made so that I don't get sued because I'm not dealing with lawsuits. So the legal disclaimer is none of us have a Juris Doctorate degree, so therefore none of us are lawyers. So therefore none of us can have legal opinions or give legal opinions. With that being said, then nothing that we say should be misconstrued as legal advice in any way, shape, or form at all. We are able to have opinions, and especially business opinions on legal matters, however. So I feel this is still a very valid topic, especially with this podcast being about leadership in cybersecurity. Leadership should be paying attention to the business side and what's going on in the business world. So with that all aside, and don't make me give the disclaimer throughout because I'm not going to. We're just one disclaimer, and that's going to cover us here. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over and let Allie and Jules kind of tell us a little bit about themselves, about their journey into cyber, and give us some background on who they are. So Allie, if you want to take it away first, go right ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for having me here, guys. Allie DiPietro. I'm a principal GRC specialist at Acquia right now. When I was in college, I wanted to be a park ranger or a lawyer or an environmental lawyer. I did all the things to be a park ranger. I worked for the state. I took the LSAT, and then I smartly went and sat in on a couple law courses and went, there is no way that I could possibly do this. My brain does not work this way. So I just thought, I bet I'd be good at project management. And then I entered the tech industry pretty much by, good luck. And people kind of noticed, like, hey, you really like reading these big, heavy documents. Like, try GRC. Not knowing what that was, got hired into a company to do FedRAMP stuff, having no idea what FedRAMP even meant. Figured it out really quick because I had no other choice. And well, I don't know, like 8 years later, here we are. So yeah, I'm another one of those stories of people that have absolutely no business being in this industry, who found their way in, and I cannot imagine there being anything else I would ever do. So kind of the same with Jules.
Yeah, awesome. Go ahead, Jules, if you want to give us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came into cyber.
Awesome. Yep. My name is Jules. I started with my interest in law when I was in like the 7th grade. My mom had a friend who was a lawyer. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Started as a paralegal when I was 18, did that for like 5 years, got my associate's degree in legal studies, and somehow just decided it wasn't the right time. So I did a couple of jobs in like contract management for the DOT. I wrote some grants for FEMA. Ended up at a project management position for Allie. We've been working together for about 4 years. We've gone our separate ways since, but we love to talk about this stuff. Delivered some SOC 2 and NIST assessments, helping in the compliance world. And I'm still a technical project manager, but this stuff is where my heart is. I could sit in a room and read a contract and pick it apart all day, every day. So happy to have this conversation with folks who are on the same page.
Awesome.
Yeah. I am so happy. It's funny because I always joke about how I'm out there always looking for new paralegals that want to come into the cyber industry because it's such a perfect transition into the industry. So lawyers, if you're out there and you're watching this, make sure you're paying your paralegals appropriately because if not, they can make more money in the cyber industry. So
you are not being paid appropriately. I can tell you, you are not.
It's very true.
So with that, let's go ahead and get the hot takes around the horn, and then we can kind of hop right into our main discussion. So Jules, take it away with your hot takes on the topic.
My first hot take is like, you really want to go toe to toe with a lawyer and not have a contract in place. It's just a real rough place to be in. These folks at this law firm, they know what they're doing. It's not costing them a lot of money to take this to court. So that's my big one there, is this is going to be real tough to argue on both sides. but the law firm, they've got the background.
Yep. Allie, your hot takes.
Yeah, the law firm has the background, but they also didn't sign a contract. So I think everyone here is bonkers. This entire case is bonkers. I would love to see this play out in court. I feel like it probably won't. I think a judge is going to laugh at it, but I'm really happy it exists so we can tear it apart.
Absolutely. Mac, go ahead. Your hot takes.
Yeah, I agree with Allie. I would love to be a fly on the wall in a courtroom if this case went to trial. It does feel like there's a lot of gaps, but the important thing is what happens when this sets a precedent for other MSPs to come under fire if security breaches happen. Where is that shared responsibility model breakdown? It's got really tricky, slippery slope.
Awesome. Hollis, your hot takes.
I think this is going to highlight one of the biggest issues that we have in IT is documentation and keeping documentation up to date and making sure that we have things that say what we're doing. So definitely wish I could be a fly as well.
Man, Hollis, you just like mimicked an entire conversation Allie and I had not even like a day ago about a totally different episode topic. So my hot takes on this is, first off, I'd love to see this discovery because I bet the tea is going to be piping hot with that discovery. Like I would love to get my hands on the discovery and be a fly in the wall in the courtroom, obviously. Again, to mimic what Max said, my hot take is the legal precedence that this is going to set not only for other MSSPs and others in the MSSP community, but also the legal precedence that it has the ability to set for the entire technical industry as a whole. I'm not sure if other industries kind of use SOWs or not, but any industry that kind of does might come under attack, or a legal precedence could be set from this case. So why is this important? This lawsuit important for people to know about? What do you guys think? I think it's the legal precedence, quite honestly. That's kind of how I want to tie into the first major topic, is like the legal precedence that it's going to set is it's huge. It has a very big impact.
Yeah, I mean, this is crazy, right? If you want to, so for those who aren't familiar with the shared responsibility model, there's this concept that all the parties involved in the cloud, so like you, the person using the cloud, the software you're using in the cloud, Amazon or Google, whatever, they all have various responsibilities, right? You can't just say like, my data is with Amazon, therefore it's safe. If a case like this were to be ruled in a really wacky way where the judge were to say, yeah, that's right, we completely do blame the third-party vendor, this is Acronis's fault or something like that, that would be wild. That would mean, you and I as people putting stuff in the cloud could really do whatever the heck we wanted and just say, well, someone else really needed to clean that up and they didn't, so it's not really my problem, which is nuts. It'd be like saying, I ripped the brakes out of my car, but that's really Toyota's fault, not mine.
Yeah, totally. Like what happens when you've got security contractors that aren't able to prevent every single attack? We're going to start prosecuting those contractors, like especially if it's unclear all the details of this case, but it looks like at least there's the suggestion that you could have leaked credentials, you could have access issues that aren't necessarily 100% the pure purview of the contracting team. So where did there's a lot of really blurry lines that could get very spicy if you see a precedent like you're saying, Natalie, come into play here, where we're saying, yeah, you've got a case. Yikes. That changes a lot of things about contract work.
We should probably summarize the case really quick.
Good call.
Good call. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, I was going to say
right,
really quickly to add to that, I do apologize, is that I think it's also going to add to the industry of cyber insurance and the fact that situations like this are going to come up, and cyber insurance being such a new industry, it's going to really lay the groundwork for what cyber insurance is and how things like this actually play out and who's going to be the person hit with the lawsuit or whatever's engaged.
Well, right, because it's
Yeah.
risk transference, right? Like that is what cyber insurance is for. So, okay, Natalie, you were pulling this up, but you got Mastigagni I'm going to say this wrong. You've got a law firm in Northern California that that contracts out to Landtech LLC, which is like an MSSP. Yep, that then uses Acronis through their backup work. Long story short, law firm gets ransomwared by Black Basta, which is a Russian loosely nation state hacking group. And now this law firm is going back and saying, hey, you guys screwed up. We are going to take you to court. So you don't want your law firm client to get hacked. To your point, Jules, like that's pretty tough. You've got a big dog coming to take you to the fight on that one. That's super high level, Natalie. Do you want to give more details about this case?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just that. There's other pieces to it as well. I was planning to break it down later, but like there's no complaint in place. Like there's an alleged complaint or an alleged contract. There's no contract in place. There's an alleged contract that's a verbal contract, and yes, verbal contracts do still stand up in court sometimes, but what MSSP is going to allow a verbal contract to occur? Like, I don't even know a sales guy. I worked at an MSSP. One of my sales guys never would have gone off of just a verbal contract with someone at all, because they wouldn't have ever gotten that opportunity actually registered to where they were getting their kickback from their, whatever their commission was.
Yeah, I mean, as the person who used to write the contracts for a business, I mean, there were people that, the founders I worked with had known for decades, and they'd be like, we just need you to do this one little thing. It's like, yeah, that's great. I still need you to sign this paper, right? Like, that is nuts. I cannot imagine any of you could ask me for help with something if it involved InfoSec, and I would probably make you sign something because I'm just not laying myself out there for that. That's just bizarre.
I mean, I'm having my house painted this year. No one's going to paint my house without a contract and proof of insurance on their end. And, this is talking about clients and their personal information and their data. As far as precedent goes, I'm really interested to see if there, for some reason, Landtech is held liable. At what point does the liability for this transfer? Because we all know you can sign a contract and start to uplift a security program. But at what point are we saying, okay, you're secure now? Because they could have been working with this customer for 3 months, but we all know that we're not secure after 3 months. So there's got to be something in that contract that even if there is liability transferred, when.
And I think bringing the third party Acronis backup into this is interesting. That would be like you suing Sherwin-Williams, right? Like that's just so far down the chain that I don't even know how that makes any sense.
I could see it though, because so the complaint has two parts to it. So the first part is a breach of contract, which is the alleged contract, hence that. And then the other one is the claims of negligence, and in the claims of negligence, there was never MFA set on the backup system, so that Acronis system was never set. So my question is, was there ever the ability to set MFA? And then if it wasn't set, then I think that there is a little bit of at least muscle behind that claim.
As far as Landtech's liability or Acronis?
I think
you could split that.
If there was no ability to set MFA, I think that kind of falls into Acronis. But if there was and it just wasn't set, then it falls to Landtech, right? So it depends on which one it is.
Okay, so we're all cyber practitioners and GRC folks. If there was a requirement in a contract for MFA, right? Otherwise, that would be the piece. We all know you should have it. We all know it's best practice. But if it's not in a document somewhere saying, hey, this is how we want our backup secured. I think about, Natalie and Allie, you guys going deep into these policy and procedure documents. I don't know how you do a verbal contract in the legal industry that is going to even allow you to have procedure documentation that lets you be legal. MFA, another one, like just it's best practice, but if you're not requiring it on paper somewhere, I feel like that's gonna fall apart in court really quickly.
Well, then from a legal perspective, I think that that's a good point, that if Acronis didn't have MFA enabled, it's still Landtech's fault because they chose them to be a provider and they were doing due care and due diligence on behalf of the law firm, right? So even if Acronis is for some reason not doing like the bare minimum, it's still on the person who decided to use it, which goes back to Landtech here in the middle.
Yeah, I would agree. I could see that. Yeah. I mean, I've seen things in court kind of get like really misconstrued, and everybody's like just pointing fingers. It's like the whole Spider-Man meme situation where everybody's just pointing at each other, and it's like, not it, man. I have a feeling this would be so much fun to just sit in this court case and just sit there and be like, soak it all in. Yeah, I think due diligence is a big it's going to be where the law firm has the biggest amount of bite in their bark, right? The breach of contract, you're going to have to prove that there was a contract. And here's the other thing. I'm sorry, but if you are ever going to obtain services from an MSSP, they give you a quote. You don't like that first quote. They come back with a second quote, right? And that quoted price is now lower. There are probably services or levels of service that they took out in order to bring it down to your price point. So you need to be very well aware of what you're actually saying you're doing, which is, I have a feeling, is what kind of came down here. Was they went to Landtech. Landtech said it's going to be XYZ per machine. They were like, don't like that price. Landtech said, okay, well, we can do a little bit lower of a service level for you and provide less services and give you the price point that you want. And they were like, yeah, but they weren't really truly understanding the difference in the services.
Well, and that's a whole part of like not being a sleazy salesperson, right? I mean, most of the time the people who are signing these contracts have absolutely no idea what you're talking about at an in-depth level. Like, yeah, they understand the concepts and they know that they need it, but at the end of the day, the person that's approving this budget is not going to be the security engineer. It's going to be somebody in finance who's like, this costs a lot of money. Please explain why we need this, make it cheaper, right? And to your point, Natalie, that makes me think there's the sentence in here, the negligent acts, omissions, breaches, and or violations that have not yet been discovered by plaintiff. Like that kind of rolls into it too. Like, okay, so if there's no contract, what things that have not yet been discovered, I don't even know how you put that into a complaint. I don't know.
It's hard to even establish what negligence really is if there isn't a contract. You don't have a minimum SOW. You don't have like, this is what the expectation is. I mean, we've got industry best practice. You've got due diligence, Natalie, to your point. But if you don't have a bottom line, I just feel like a decent defense attorney could poke holes in that in about 10 minutes.
Well, and we're not talking about defense attorney here. So to be very clear, we're still talking like, yes, this is a defendant and a plaintiff, right? But we're not talking like a defense attorney as in like criminal defense. We're talking about civil litigation type of defense. So
but if this were to go to court,
But yeah, if it were, I could see any civil litigation attorney poking holes in it. And that's like literally their job, is to poke holes in the complaint. And they could easily poke holes. But then there's also the reverse for the plaintiff. Like they do have a little bit, I think, I feel like not setting MFA, it is best practice. And that was really stupid. Not sorry for thinking that.
So yeah, I have a question for Jules and Natalie on that. In your experience in courtrooms, how often is "you should have known better" like a defensible thing that you could say?
Yeah.
You should
Not.
like
I mean,
to put
I
it
guess
on the
it comes
plaintiff?
down to, like, I guess does the reasonable person standard come in here? Because, the average person is not versed in this. They probably don't know what MFA really even is. And, is a law firm held to that standard? Or are they held to a higher standard of knowing how they should protect their data? it's hard. It's I guess this is going to be the determining factor. What are your thoughts, Natalie?
I think it matters, like the amount of expertise you have comes into play, right? So like for the law firm, the you should have known better defense is not going to fly for land tech whatsoever because they were the experts. They were the ones responsible for providing the expert guidance, right? Whereas like land tech, that definitely should have been something they should have known better. I'm not sorry for saying it. Like they should have known, they're the experts in the field. They should have known better. And that's kind of where I could see that claim of negligence coming into play. But again, that all only matters if we have an actual contract that lays out that they were actually doing security services. Like there's a big difference between network monitoring up and down versus actual SIEM monitoring, 24/7 eyes on glass.
Well, and that's the should have known better thing though, right? Like what is reasonable for a security professional to know, right? Like without a contract, what can we assume that you know to do? I would hope MFA is one of those things, but I just don't know, like, and it's an honest question. I'm not like proselytizing. I don't know what the answer to that question is because I don't think this industry has been around long enough to be able to say.
Yeah, I think this brings up a really interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hollis.
I was just apologizing. Yeah. Yeah. So like when it comes to actual experience and standards and all that, IT, while it does have ISO, we have SOC 2 compliance, and we have compliance itself. The knowledge barrier, there's a lot of duct tape in every place that I've been in. It's duct tape, it's hot glue, it's whatever we can put together to make it work at the cheapest price usually. So standards aren't really there. There aren't a defined set of standards besides if you want to follow something like MITR or ISO or an RFC, right? You can follow an RFC to the T, but is that really the perfect thing? So,
well, and security is not perfect, right? That's what I will say is like security is not perfect. And can we really blame somebody who maybe they made a mistake and it wasn't like necessarily negligent, but it was just like a mistake that happens. Like that's a learning experience for us in this field. And that's kind of the nice thing about being in cyber is there is room for learning. But at the same time, yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that. That's always the worst.
You know, it's a good transition into an errors and omission clause in your contract. I mean, it's nearly impossible to get ahead of everything in security. I mean, just like the law can't really keep up with tech, it's always a couple of steps behind. Having a clause like that explicitly calls out what you're doing and that you can't do everything in one contract is going to be extremely important moving forward. And I'm going to expect to see E&O clauses expand like dramatically for these MSSPs.
Yeah. And I hope that this teaches some people in the industry a lesson of maybe getting their contracts reviewed by an attorney before they actually have them signed by a client. Like not every time, but like if you have a templated type of contract that you have in place that you get signed and you basically are just removing minor details in and out, like that an attorney is not necessarily going to know the intricacies of anyway, like get the standard reviewed by an attorney before you have a client sign it. I hope that also gets improved in this industry because there's not a lot of people that have their attorneys review the contracts.
So we've kind of landed on, the fact that there wasn't a contract is the big sticking point here. If we throw that out and we let this kind of stand as maybe just the thought experiment of clients being able to hold security providers responsible when a breach happens. It's that assume breach, except for assume breach, so we're going to take you to court. Especially for Allie and Jules and Natalie, you guys say you love to get into these big, dense documents. Like, what could this change for small security firms, small cybersecurity firms that might have been relying on this implied share responsibility model, that might have been kind of operating in that, to your point, Hollis, unknown duct tapey world between CSPs and actual, boots on the ground folks running seams and stuff like that. What is the potential shift towards having to bake some of this language into statements of works and RFPs and all kinds of the way we do work in this industry? What do you think?
I think it's going to get expensive for the MSSP to make sure their contracts are rock solid. And I think, I forgot what else I was going to say.
I think, well, something Jules and I have had to manage a bunch is a lot of times the people who are like the boots on the ground doing the work on these contracts may not have experience, and Natalie, you and I do this too, with project management or scope management or things like that. So what they may think is like a perfectly reasonable thing to do, one of the three of us might see it and be like, oh my gosh, that's not on the SOW. You can't do that. Like that's completely out of scope. If it goes wrong, that's going to backfire, right? So it's really also having to train massive technical teams on how to recognize when you're being asked something that starts to like go off the rails into some sort of gray area and like correct it back. And I think that's really hard, especially for really technical folks, because a lot of times they're like, well, it does support this main thing. Like it's super obvious. If I fix this, it fixes this problem. But it's like, we don't have legal coverage for it, so you can't. And like, it's so hard to have that black and white thinking when you're in tech, because like, it's like trying to figure out when you're doing like, what counts as stuff within like the FedRAMP boundary. That's always a really good one, right? Like, well, I don't know. Like how far back do you want to look, right? There's no easy answer. So it's like, it's hard to teach people what to look for and when they're supposed to raise their hand.
Yeah. And I think that, like Jules said, to Jules' point, we're probably going to see more error and omission clauses in contracts. We probably also will see some type of requirement for you to have some type of cybersecurity insurance before an MSSP will pick you up. That's going to be another thing. So it's going to be a burden for both the consumer and the supplier, right, in this. And then also, I think it's going to become more prevalent that you have like risk assessment because of the cyber insurance, obviously, but then supply chain risk management and knowing who your suppliers are. I think that's going to be put on every single MSSP and the consumers themselves to know where is our risk tolerance, what is our risk appetite, and also what can we do to make sure that we're actually addressing those risks and we're not just like saying, oh, well, we're fine, turn a blind eye to it. It'll be okay, right? It'll be okay.
I mean, we're pretty much the only industrialized country that doesn't have something like that in place, right? Like that's what GDPR does in part, right? Is like require you to understand like where the data goes, what happens to the data. These people know what to do with the data. Like everybody has that but us. So yeah, some laws around it eventually will have to happen. The more breaches and things that there are, and the more that the general public understands how catastrophic it can be when their data enters any of these, gray areas, the more pressure there'll probably be for there to be some sort of federal action on it.
Yeah. And I think we might also see like some education for those smaller businesses on more shared responsibility, because like we still don't know where the breach happened at, right? Like we don't know who caused the breach, who was actually breached. Was it the MSSP's credentials that were breached, or was it the actual law firm credentials that were breached? We don't know. And I've seen it go before where like I had a client before a long time ago. I'm not going to say anything too much into too many details, but we actually we were running a pen test against them, and somehow one of our accounts became compromised. And when they did the retroactive, it turned out that law firm had a local admin account on all these machines, and they were using a very basic password that was easily able to be like kind of determined from things that were on their website and that were publicly facing. And so we kind of had to sit down with them because they were like, well, it was your account that got breached. And we were like, well, it was your account that got breached first. And then they were able to dump credentials into and then breach. But if your account wasn't breached, this never would have happened. So like you need to change the password, which they did.
Gotta
also
love ABC
expecting-
1, 2, 3. Sorry, go ahead, Jules.
I was gonna say, I'm also expecting like the standards for backups to increase after this. I mean, it says in here that they did not have backups that were saved automatically for 30 days. They went in and deleted the backup. There's nothing in here about, did they recommend immutable backups or something that's saved permanently or for a specific amount of time. So I think that it's going to really up the standard, and that also increases the price for these smaller companies.
We got a comment in chat from Carolyn Vernon talking about audits. And Allie, this kind of plays into something that you mentioned earlier. Up until we get to the point where we have something like a GDPR, legal standards in place, other industries like pharma, for example, you're going to see a ton of audits before you sign a contract with someone. They're going to come in and they're going to want to see under the hood and they're going to want to ask questions. And it happens in cybersecurity, but it happens less. There's a lot more of these like, hey, we do white glove holistic security. Like, we'll take care of all of this for you, because people don't understand this industry. People think, go do the cybersecurity as a relative newcomer to this field. Like, it's a whole mysterious smoke and mirror show. So I agree with what Carolyn's suggesting. Like, maybe what we see is that before you enter into even a nonverbal contract with a security provider, like, are we going to see the rise of true auditing the way that we see in some other industries where, these kind of breaches are also more established, and we've seen the kind of devastation, for example, like in pharma and in the medical industry?
So in a lot of compliance frameworks, they will say that the law firm in this situation should have done the due diligence to see what the third-party suppliers were and how they acted. So things like Acronis, they should have asked those questions. But the interesting thing is, I would say if you're outsourcing your backups, you probably don't know to ask that question, because you probably don't even know what any of that means anyways. So in like a legal sense and a compliance sense, there's absolutely nothing really saying that Landtech had to do any due diligence with this, which is what's absolutely insane, right? Like, if you look at precedent and you look at the frameworks, it says that it's completely on the law firm, which is just nuts, because they wouldn't know any better.
Right.
I mean, you do have some lawyers out there, and I do want to give props to the lawyer who actually found this case for us. So Don Geider, thank you very much. I hope you are watching and you hear the shout out. But you do have some lawyers out there that actually specialize in cybersecurity that would know this. But like, it would be on that law firm, I think, to contract one of those lawyers to say, hey, what questions do I need to ask this person? Kind of ordeal, like if they wanted to have that fall back on the law firm. I think the Acronis piece of it is actually more so on Landtech, because they're the ones that acquired that software, right?
Oh, I 100% agree with that. But just based on like what the compliance frameworks say and like how due diligence typically works, it would be on the person purchasing the services in like the most plain sense, which is nuts. I agree with you. Like, it shouldn't, if you're buying the services, it's because you need the help. So you shouldn't be the one vetting the third party. Yeah,
especially if you're like, go talk to the security people. Which is what most small businesses are like, we have security people, they'll handle this. And then, when I ran SOC, I had people that would be like, you are our security people, what are you doing about this? And I'm like, well, that's not the service that you've purchased. Let's talk about services and levels of service here, and let's talk about SLAs, because no, I'm not responsible for your breach because so-and-so didn't reset their password, because all I'm responsible for is making sure that like you don't have anything showing up in antivirus or whatever it was. Like, there were people that really thought that we were their security people, but we were really their network monitoring people.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of an example of it. And like the most ludicrous thing I can come up with is like, if someone said I had to go vet like the third party who's building parts of my car, and they were like, go vet the person that makes the steel in the foundry, I'd be like, do you make steel? Good. Yeah. Okay. That's all I know to ask you. Like, it's ridiculous. No one's ever going to have the information to do that. And that's where you shouldn't have to.
Yeah. I would agree. So let's talk about the shared responsibility model a little bit, because like that's another piece of this that I think that we kind of are missing in this conversation is like we're still not 100% sure where the breach happened at, whose responsibility it is, but who wants to go ahead and give their take on shared responsibility, and then I'll give my take of how I taught myself shared responsibility. Allie, I'll volunteer you.
I knew you were going to do that. Yeah, so the shared responsibility model is kind of like a framework or a model that explains who's responsible for what aspects of things in the cloud, right? So when I go and put stuff in the cloud, it would be really silly of me or of anyone to assume that I'm responsible for the physical server and the room that server is sitting in somewhere in Virginia, right? That's something Amazon is taking care of. They're making sure that the room stays the right temperature, no one's breaking into it, that the machine isn't failing. And it's my job to make sure that the data I'm putting on there is good quality data, that it isn't garbage, that it's not breaking laws. So the shared responsibility model just breaks down all those little aspects of when you're using a system like that, who is responsible for what parts, and what parts do you have to make sure that you're accounting for in your day-to-day processes versus which parts are, what we call in compliance inherited. So things that we can always know. The temperature of the room is never going to be my problem. It's always on.
Yeah, but making sure that the operating system that I'm running in the cloud is my problem, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So funny story, how I taught myself shared responsibility model in like 10 minutes or less was legal liability. Where does this legal liability lie? And who's going to be responsible at the end of the day and being held accountable for that risk at the end of the day in dinero, because that's what business all wraps back to, is who's responsible for the money of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, especially if you're coming from some sort of legal background, right? Yeah, I guess you could sit there and ask yourself, like, okay, if you breached my system because my password was password 123, is that Amazon's problem? No, I picked a bad password. That's on me. So yeah, that's a good way to think of it.
Yeah. I'm also. Does somebody else have something else to say?
I guess like the kind of middle ground between, having a good password and then AWS has a temperature controlled environment. We're getting into the middle ground here where, say, you have sensitive data in an S3 bucket. Is it public or is it private? Is it protected? Whose job is it to make sure it's private and protected? Would that fall to, say, a client or their MSSP? And that's where this gets muddy, because it's the user, but the user can then transfer their liability to a person that they hire to make sure it's secure.
Contracts.
Right. Those Venn diagram crossovers, to your point, Jules, like they're ephemeral. Like, right, if a user's in there, or if someone at this law firm like loses their access credentials, like that model, it doesn't shift, but the emphasis and the attack vector for that model shifts around depending on what's happening. And again, we come back to the fact that cybersecurity isn't as standardized in like a legal sense. So you can go on LandTech's website and you can look at their services and it's like, hey, we take care of all this stuff for you. So why, if I'm just Joe Lawyer and I want my network to be secure and I want to make sure that I've got cloud backups, you'd really have to know, Natalie, to your point, you have to be one of those handful of like tech savvy lawyers to really drill down into this and ask for this. I'm not sure that as a population, we're used to asking for the nitty gritty of these shared responsibility models when we're thinking about something that is as nebulous and kind of unknown as cloud security and cloud computing.
Well, it's also made a lot harder by the fact that I don't think most people understand how the cloud works. I mean, this room is an exception, right? Because we do this all day. But I mean, the average person, and I'm not talking about like my dad who's retired in his 70s. I'm talking about like someone who like, works a modern job and is probably on computers all day and uses the cloud all day, probably cannot explain to you the very basic structure of how the cloud works, right? And that's a big problem because these are the people who are also the ones signing the contracts. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to understand how that technology works. And if you ask somebody to come run it for you, it's kind of assumed that they're going to do it securely, and they'll tell you that your password's garbage and you should fix it.
Something that's called out explicitly in the the negligence aspect of this complaint is that the plaintiff was told to change its backup system to cloud-based. So they're saying, well, we had our backups on our computer in the closet, 6 months ago, and then we moved it to the cloud and we got breached. So that's a whole nother level. Yeah.
It's all the
Blame
cloud.
the cloud.
Damn the cloud. How dare they exist and make our lives easier but less secure. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and that's like a whole other podcast you could do, is like this sudden rise in anti-cloud, and like going back on-prem is the way to go. And it's like, yeah, you can cherry pick the facts all you want, man, but that's just not the reality of like how the cloud works. Like if you choose to leave your front door unlocked and someone breaks into your house, it's not the lock's fault. It's your fault, right? So it's just such a funny statement. Like that just sticks out. I highlighted it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that they're blaming the cloud. And again, we don't even know where the breach actually occurred. They need to do the retroactive, like they need to complete the retroactive to determine where the breach even happened at, who's at fault, whose responsibility was that breach. It would also be very interesting, and as an MSSP, like somebody who ran an MSSP, like the SOC of an MSSP anyway, it would be very interesting to know if the attorneys are actually receiving solid and detailed user training of how to be a good user, like security awareness type of training. Because I think that also comes into it. It's everybody's responsibility to know basic cyber hygiene, and not a lot of companies see that happen. That's one of the biggest upsells I ever had when I worked in SOC, and I would always upsell cybersecurity training. You should get some cybersecurity training implemented. Like,
all right, so that's a super good point that I wanted to bring up too. This is not a cybersecurity lawyer. This is not an internet lawyer in any way. This is a lawyer, I think, that deals with like the public sector. Yeah, public services. So this lawyer who wrote this does not have experience in this type of case. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. It's just, does that change anything, do you think?
I mean, to know that they needed to get cybersecurity training?
In general,
anything?
or just, and what they think are the legitimate reasons to file a complaint.
Well, here's the thing. Lawyers sometimes get too happy, especially when they get mad and upset, and they're like, my shit got hacked. Like that. And that's literally what's going on here, is their stuff got hacked. They're mad. They want somebody to blame. They want somebody to push that responsibility off onto. They had very sensitive data, and they admitted they know that their data is very sensitive data, right? They admit that in their complaint. They know that their data is very sensitive. They told Lantech that this data is very, very sensitive data. So I think that like they should have at least known to, if they didn't know, they should have asked, what questions are we not asking you that we need to be asking you? At the very least, I think lawyers are very educated people, right? They go through how many years of law school? I mean, it's 8 years of school total, right? Post college or post high school, that you have to go through to become a lawyer. So like they're very educated. They normally 9 times out of 10 will hire someone to tell them what they don't know. So why did they not do that? And some of that is that their own due diligence, I feel. So I think the MSSP probably should have recommended it for sure, some type of user training. But that's just my 2 cents. I don't know. Jules, what's yours? What's your take on it?
I guess, the lawyers hiring an expert to tell them which questions they should ask, would that not be the MSSP? I mean, they are the experts. They did hire this company to advise them how to be secure. Whether or not there was a contract, they sought these professionals and put their trust in them.
The website says, we can help you address any issues we may find to help keep your data safe and your network secure. to your point, Allie, like if we don't have a standard in place, are you expected to go down to the Toyota factory and ask about the composition of the steel to make sure that your kid's safe when you're driving your car, right? This is complicated. Do we expect if a tech firm is positioning themselves as experts and they're providing a service that's promising to deliver on X, Y, and Z security configurations, and they don't do that, can the client really be expected to have to know all the questions to be like, yeah, but are you doing this? Like, what kind of encryption are you using? What kind of authentication are you using? That's why you're hiring an expert.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. Like that they should have been the expert that advised them. It sounds like there was a lack of advice that was given by the MSSP. Am I freezing for everybody, or can it? No,
I got you loud and clear.
Okay, I just want to make sure because it looked like I was glitching. So I can see that. I can see what happens if the MSSP said, "Hey, man, you need to do some end user training because your users keep getting breached. Like we send them, or they have like we've gotten 5 phone calls in the past week for somebody needing their password reset because they had a phishing email. They clicked on the email, they inputted their credentials, and then they realized after the fact that it was a phishing attempt, and they inputted credentials, so now they have to change their passwords." And the lawyer said, well, that's not really something we want to do right now. Like, and I could see that happening too. So like what happens when that advice was given and then the lawyer didn't take it as well could be another aspect of it. I think it all comes back to what services were actually sold in the alleged contract.
All comes back to the contract.
It all comes back to whether there's actually a contract and what's in that contract. Because we can say, yes, security services, but we all know that that's not everything in cyber. Like, you're not going to go to an MSSP and find 15 cloud experts. I mean, you might, but you probably won't. You're probably going to find a bit of a mix between hybrid cloud professionals and people with on-prem experience. So like, it really does all come back to what does the contract actually state that they're going to do in their services.
Yeah. For anyone listening, contracts, have them.
Contracts, read them.
Have your
Policies,
attorney
procedures,
read
read them.
Yes, read the documents or hire people to read the documents for you.
Right. We need a Jules that just gets into the big, granular, very small text, very small spacing documents and just rips them apart. Like everybody needs a Jules.
Gotta have your highlighters ready.
I feel seen.
Allie was ready. Allie was ready with the highlighter. I love that.
All right. So what are the next steps in the lawsuit? For those that don't know, like procedure, there's going to be a chance for the defendant to kind of respond to the complaint if they choose to. Sometimes they might file a motion to dismiss. There just all depends on how they want to go about it, what their plan of attack is. Eventually after that, there's going to be discovery produced and requests for discovery. So in discovery, you have interrogatories and you have requests for production of documents. And then there's also something called the Freedom of Information Act that allows you to do a request for production of documents, basically, that is, not actually a part of like a legal case. It's usually from like a public entity or whatnot. So interrogatories are kind of like, I think of them like really long interrogation questions that the attorney is going to be posing towards the other side, whatever attorney on whichever side is going to be posing towards the other to try to discover more information and get further clarity. And then request for production of documents is basically asking for a bunch of evidence. And that a lot of times it looks like they're just like throwing darts at the wall and seeing what sticks kind of ordeal, what they get back. So that's what's coming up. I really, really would love to see that discovery. And then, so let's talk about what we look forward to most, and then we can kind of wrap it up. Hollis, why don't you talk a little bit, because you've been very quiet today.
I do apologize. My sinuses are killing me down here in the South. The thing that I really want to see out of this is more standards being defined in our industry, and actually seeing something come to fruition with how we approach things when it comes to MSSPs or MSPs and the standards that come with that, and not just an assumption of, well, they're an expert. We need to define what an expert is and define what security is and what secure is, instead of saying, well, secure is just inherently secure. So hopefully that comes out of this, and we don't just keep saying that, yeah, that's secure, with the door taped and the bolts off, right? So
Go ahead, Mac. What are you looking forward to most?
Oh man, +1 to Hollis. I think, I'm not sure this case is the case that we see that like stokes the flames of revolution, but if this could lead to standards, Ali, you mentioned the GDPR, like there has to be teeth. Otherwise, we're still kind of in the Wild West, where people can say they do a thing, and that thing could be on any sliding scale of the options of things. I think that we're going to continue to see this kind of situation happen. I think it happens a lot. I think this time it happened to a law firm that had a certain degree of prominence and was able to get it in the news. But I think this kind of situation happens often when we think about outsourcing the security of our data, the security of our systems, the security of our identities to contract providers, if that's Google and Amazon, or if that's someone like this technical firm or their backup firm. If this can result in a step towards more stringent standards that actually have teeth to them, so that we can hold both customers accountable for making sure they do their due diligence, and providers accountable for making sure that they're delivering a certain standard, that ultimately is going to lead to a lot more legitimacy for our industry.
Go ahead, Allie. Next.
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to just talk about how the general public needs more exposure to what happens with their data and what security really means. As we talked about, I think if you ask an MSP to come in and do something for you, you're kind of asking them to help. And in this case, I don't think that really happened. So I'm not blaming the law firm, but Natalie, you and I were talking to a pen tester like last week, I think, who said one of his favorite things to do was to send out an email to teams he was working for saying like, oh, it's time for annual security training. If you don't think you need it, put your name and password into the spreadsheet to like not have to do it, right? And like 50% of the companies will always end up doing it, which is hilarious. But at the same time, I read an article like 3 weeks ago that said only 30% of people think security training is useful, right? So there's clearly a huge disconnect of how we're educating people and getting them to care, or even how to like ask the right questions of an MSSP that they might be hiring to make informed decisions. So I'd like to see just more people know what questions to ask, really, and not just think it's just an annoying box check exercise. What do you think, Jules?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the exposure here, kind of going along the same lines, is I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing, companies putting their investments in security. There are so many instances where, a company of 500 people has 1 or 2 people working in security, and they're probably kind of like the ugly stepchild of the group, and no one takes them seriously. So an investment in security for these companies, and an investment in good cyber insurance is going to be huge coming from this.
Yeah, I'd really love to see next like a standard, and kind of to mimic Mac and Hollis a little bit, is an actual standard that MSSPs and other security contractors are actually held to, that is very specific to them. That includes a little bit of contracts in there, like having contracts reviewed by an attorney. NIST 853 definitely requires it. So I mean, we should be requiring that contracts are reviewed by an attorney that knows what they're looking at, right? And I think it might set a little bit more of a precedence on the legal side for lawyers that do specialize in cybersecurity to come out of the woodwork and get a little bit more work in there. That way we have somehow to hold the MSSPs, the contractors accountable for what they say they're delivering and making sure that their customers, because it is a little bit on the MSSP to not explain to their customers what services they're actually getting versus what services they're missing out on, right? Nobody's ever going to say, we're going to do all the security things for you. We'll just take care of everything. No worries. Have at it. Bye. Because there's still liability in doing that, like making those executive decisions when you're not an executive at that company. That can bring along its own struggles and problems, right? Unless you're like a vCISO type of service. But and I hope that people start to really look at those contracts a little bit more thoroughly and making sure that they're CYA. CYA is everything. All right. Well, we are ready to wrap it up. So I know we did what we look forward to the most, but let's give our final takes on this and go ahead. Hollis, you go first.
Yeah, the whole case itself is wild. Not having something defined that says that, hey, I'm going to provide the service for you, and the other party saying, hey, my house caught on fire. You built the porch though. So something like this really needs to get more light on it, and hopefully it does, so that we actually get some kind of coverage into the field instead of just the average. You go on LinkedIn and, oh, well, I didn't know about that, but now I do. So hopefully this has some more news coverage and we see things start to move forward.
Mac, I guess we're going to go in the same order. Mac, go ahead.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, again, I still think like huge drive for standardization and for some teeth to some regulations. But I also love what Jules and Allie got into, the idea of getting some knowledge out into the general population about like, what does cyber hygiene look like? If someone comes up to you on the street and like gives you a cookie and is like, I promise it's nutritious, you're not going to be like, oh my God, thank you so much, I'm going to eat this, right? Like, we're all taught to not like check your candy for razor blades. We should also be teaching folks to like, put multi-factor authentication on your stuff, like that's important. So yeah, great opportunities for growth all around. Allie, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing I said before, right? Contracts, have them. Like literally anything. If you're spending over $100 on something on Facebook Marketplace, have them sign a bill of sale. Like if you don't know what you're looking at, have a friend read it. It doesn't have to be a lawyer. If the person you're working with says, I would prefer you not have a friend read it, don't do business with that person, right? Like just document stuff, right? Document everything and have someone else look at it. Just sanity check it. CYA. Jules?
I think the small things that everyone can do and learn about here, MFA, using a password manager, just really basic things that we can teach our lowest level all the way up to our highest level employees to kind of get into the security kind of mindset and be a part of the conversation all the way from the bottom to the top is really what I'm looking forward to.
Well, and not only that, but also making sure that that's not just once a year, because once a year training doesn't work. We've seen that, right? Like we've seen it time and time again where like somebody gets once a year training, they take the training, they did great on the training, and 6 weeks later they got a password compromise. Making sure that you're sending those notifications out regularly, at least once a month, saying, hey, don't forget, security is still part of everybody's job. That's also very important. And I really look forward to see where this goes, and hopefully there could be some. I hope that at the end of it, there are some good laws that are written that are not going to be to where the cybersecurity community can still live with it at the end of the day, right? Like that's really what I hope with, because like a lot of times we look at some of the laws that have previously been written, and you're just like, who wrote this? Because they obviously don't know anything about our industry at all. So I hope that we can at least be okay with the laws that are written at the end of the day that come from this, right? So those are our final takes. Thank you so much, Jules and Allie, for joining us, and everybody else that joined us out in the audience. Look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks, and I hope everybody has a great time.
Thanks so much for having us, guys. It was awesome.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.